and welcome to Inside Edition to discuss national and regional issues in depth. Our main focus today will be on the spreading epidemic of terrorism and how it destabilizes countries and displaces people. On this subject, Shura Council member Mr. Ahmed Al-Haddad will elaborate. We will also review regional efforts to eliminate terrorism and deal with its repercussions. More in this report.
Terrorism is an epidemic potentially taking the world under its folds of brutality and violence. An act of terror is defined as the use of violence, force and power over others in order to achieve one set of political, religious and economic objectives, and it has caused much chaos and anarchy in the society. It inculcates fear and terror in the mind of individual and as a result sprouts more terror out of the society. Terrorism seems like an outgrowth of injustice prevailing in the society and lack of education.
Firstly, we have to be very clear what terrorism is. We also have to be very clear as to the different forms of terrorism and the different reasoning behind terrorism. I think what we're facing now, and especially that's of concern in the Middle East and Europe, is the rise of extremist ideologies. And we should say extremism rather than radicalization, or extremism rather than even if you use like religious related thematics, because in fact what we're seeing is the rise of extremist ideologies on the left, on the right, in terms of religion. So even if there is a rise, for example, in a place like Belgium, of Islamist behaviors, there's also a rise of nationalist behaviors, and it in many cases has nothing to do with religion. You've had extreme nationalists in Belgium, for instance, between Flanders and Wallonia for 50 years. And so one of the tendencies now is to kind of pile off all of our own extremisms in Europe onto the story that unfolds with Islam and Christianity in Europe. But the story is much deeper than that. And I think that's one of the strategies needs to be to stop extremist ideologies and extremist identities from being formed, and then hopefully by preventing that or slowing that process down, we also reduce the number of actions related to terrorism.
Daesh remained the greatest terrorism threat globally. Despite the losses it sustained last year, Daesh continues to occupy large areas of Iraq and Syria and is spreading in the region. Meanwhile, Al-Qaeda is one of the most threatening and dangerous terrorist organizations in the world. In addition to Taliban, the militant organization operating in Afghanistan, the African Boko Haram, Iranian Lebanese Hezbollah, the Somalian Al-Shabaab, as well as the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia.
On one hand, it's a reflection of desperation. It could be moral desperation, doesn't have to be material desperation. On the other hand, it's kind of a tool for revenge, and it's a tool for deterrence. And so many times it's the weak that are going to use terrorism to try to level the playing field. And so if you look historically at when terrorism is going to emerge, what you see is either a failed state or a failed organization or some kind of community-based failure. And that's why what you'll see now, especially, and now's a very important time in history, is that Daesh or ISIS is it's falling, it's collapsing. And every day it's losing territory and it's losing its legitimacy, even amongst the most radical people who supported it before. And what we see as a result of that is that ISIS-inspired terrorism is increasing as the organization falls apart. What it was doing in Syria was guerrilla warfare. What guerrilla warfare turned into was, essentially terrorism. And so in that case, in the case of, something like the failure of ISIS, of course we wouldn't want to keep ISIS alive at all, but we should basically just brace ourselves for the fact that as the organization falls apart more, so there will be more acts of terrorism.
As the 20th century has given way to the new millennium, terrorism has remained on the rise in a diverse range of countries from around the world.
Welcome back. Joining us in the studio is Mr. Ahmed Al-Haddad, who is a member of the Bahrain Shura Council, as well as the chairman of the Human Rights Committee at the Council, and also you are the member of the Trustees Board of Bahrain Institute for Political Development. Welcome to the show, Mr. Haddad. When we saw the video we just saw, after watching this, what, in your opinion, assisted terrorist ideologies in spreading?
Well, thank you first of all for having me, Bahrain TV. It's a pleasure for us to be always here. Well, there are so many factors. The spread of international terrorism. Media, for instance, it's one reason. Like TV, WhatsApp, Internet, Instagram, games. Now, this has facilitated the task for these people to use it very cleverly to spread their idea. Now, with these medias and tools, there is no borders between countries. In 1 minute, in a second, they can be in touch with each other, they can spread their ideas, and this has contributed a lot to the spread of this kind of international terrorism, which the world is witnessing now.
Yes, yes. Now, media has a very big effect because of the availability of it. But is there something else that you might say, for instance, like have the policies of countries changed? Because we see that there's a big effect of terrorism on the countries that they are located in, where the militias are located.
Absolutely. This is not only a factor which has aided the spread of this kind of terrorism. There are other factors, like for instance, economic factors.
Yeah.
When there are unemployment in a country or in so many countries, that will give the opportunity to these people to exploit those unemployed. Yeah. Because if somebody is in need of money and he's desperate, what can he do?
Yes.
I read an article just 4 months back, New York Times. A lieutenant general in ex-Iraqi army, he had 7 children with a wife, and he wanted to survive. So he went to the Iraqi officials and said, look, I have experience, I want to join the army. Unfortunately, for certain reason, they declined him. So where did he go? He go to Daesh. They received him, they gave him $3,000 per month, and there they started. Yes. So there are certain reasons behind it. Economic is very important.
Yes.
When you need something, when you are desperate, you are ready to do anything. But some countries some officials are giving the opportunity for these people to be in the system. But unfortunately, they have not taken that. And there are so many cases that article mentioned. So this is economic is very important. And also religious beliefs, you know. Some people, they believe in what they are doing. And that's what they are committed. And it's not only the poor who are vulnerable to such kind of, spread of ideas. It is also the elite, the intellectuals. They are very much committed. Doctors, you have artists, you have engineers. Look, when underground London was attacked, who were behind it? All well-educated from well-off families.
Yes. That is now on how the ideology spread. Now they are actually integrated into some of the most important countries in the world and in the Middle East. How are these militias affecting these countries, in your opinion?
Well, you know, this idea is affecting a lot of countries. Islamic countries, Arabic countries, Western. It's international phenomena. Yes. It's not only state A or state B. It's everywhere in the world. So, as I said, there are people who are ready to receive these ideas. Yes. They are well educated, they are illiterate, they can exploit them, but they are ready to see, and they have the means. As I said, the media, they have the economic resources, they have the finance, they have the money, and there are so many entities in the world who can help. Look, subcontinent, Indian subcontinent, a lot of them come from there. Yeah. And they are well off, educated, engineers, doctors,
Yes.
And why they're committed? Because they believe what they are doing.
Yes.
Now they're coming from ex-Soviet Unions.
Yes.
So many of them.
All right.
Well, this, when you are convinced what you are doing, they're ready to do anything.
Yes.
When they put bomb on their body and they go and kill innocent people,
Yes.
they are convinced but what is our role? How to prevent such kind of things? This is very important. We have to have a clear plan, clear message, clear policy. Not only the governments. The governments, they can have a role to play.
Yeah.
But we as the people, we should start from the family.
As a society as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The family has very important role here to play. Schools,
Yes.
like mosque,
Yeah.
we have modern clerks.
Well, let's talk about that point. I mean, we know that there is a problem, and before we reach to the point where how are we going to help solve this problem, how does terrorism affect a society, not a country, like a specific society?
Well, look, when you have terrorist acts, the society has no safety at all. That means he lives in a constant danger.
Yes.
If I am at home and I feel that I am insecure when I go out, I will never go out. When you see bombs thrown all over, you don't feel safe anymore. And this is also a psychological problem. And if you have that problem, insecurity, it affects the whole family, it affects the economic welfare of the family, it affects the growth of the country economically, and you lose everything. If I feel that tomorrow I'll go on the road and I don't feel safe, I should be stuck in the house. And the family also, and everybody in the society.
Yes.
So what I want to say is this, security is very important for each and everybody.
Yes.
Once you lose that, you lose everything.
Yeah. You don't feel safe in your own home.
Absolutely, absolutely. Look, you go to the airports now.
Yes.
Before, in the 70s, 60s, it takes you 15 minutes to get direct, and you are allowed to go direct to the airplane. Now, it takes you 4 hours. You have so many things. You feel fed up, but we don't feel angry.
Yeah.
Because ultimately,
It's necessary.
it is our security which is involved. And these people, we should appreciate what they're doing.
True.
They're doing for us to protect us and not to have, being killed for a reason or another.
True. Now, you touched on the point before about how media has been affecting the spread of terrorism, but how, from your opinion, how is media handling the acts or operations of the terrorists?
Well, whenever there is an act of terrorism,
Yes.
it's spread in a minute. Yesterday there was a bomb in the mosque in Afghanistan. So many innocent people were killed. So the modern technology, the way it spreads all these news, this affects us. And we, each and every day, in 1 minute, you can see what's happening in the world. And there, you feel sorry for those who are killed. And you look for reasons behind it.
Yes.
Why? Well, maybe I have difference between A and B. Maybe there is religious differences, economic differences. But we shouldn't go to that extremism of killing innocent people. Well, why don't you go and attack the army? Why? Because they cannot reach the army. The army is well protected. They go to the innocent people. They kill innocent people. Why you do that? Go to the source. If you have the power, go to the army. Because they don't go to the army because they know they'll be killed.
They prey on the weak.
Absolutely. And this is unfortunate.
All right. When we also look at religious extremism, the main excuse for groups like Daesh, like Al-Qaeda, is their religious belief. How are groups like this, how are they able to twist the interpretation of religion in such an ugly way?
Well, there are so many reasons behind it. These people, maybe out of desperation, out of their commitment. What I'm saying, commitment, they believe what they are doing. They believe in pure Islam, which is, 100 years back.
Yes.
We cannot go back to that era. The world have changed. Even our Prophet, peace be upon him, He was very, very, accepting everybody from the other faith.
True.
He was very amicable to other faith. True. He never, went and asked for those who have not converted to Islam to come and be Muslim by force, by dialogue, by conventions, and it should be that way. Why you should enforce your idea on me? Well, I am Muslim, okay, but I also should respect the others. Other Muslims who believe, do have difference also madhab or beliefs, we should also respect our colleagues, Christian community, Jewish community, Hindus.
Yes.
You take the person as he is.
What do you think gave him the right, or gave them the right to basically think that their version of Islam is the correct one? How
let me tell you this. This is not a generalized idea. Let them say whatever they want. Okay? Maybe there are certain numbers of people who support them. But the majority of Islamic countries against this idea.
Yes.
Look, in Bahrain, it's a very open society, very tolerant. His Majesty the King, the Prime Minister, the Crown Prince, and all the state high officials in the country, they always said that this is tolerant Islam. It's not this type of Islam.
Yes.
Well, there are certain section of people who follow this ideology, but the majority of Islamic countries, they are against it. And this is a very good health kind of understanding of dealing with these people. Because if the majority is against them, well, I saw this on TV, what this gentleman has said, and he said that Daesh is being at the end of its days and is being defeated. Maybe he's correct partly. But I think if Daesh is defeated, and it will take a lot of time for that, they have been bombarding for 2 years, more than 2 years, but still they're strong. Even if they are defeated militarily in Iraq and in Syria, they will go underground.
Yes.
And that will be a big problem to deal with them. And here, as Muslim countries, or certain countries who are affected by this phenomenon, should have a clear policy to be prepared for this stage also.
Yes.
Because once they're defeated, they'll go underground. And that's also very dangerous.
Of course.
They will be with us for certain times to come.
Of course. Now, before I get to my next question, just going back to what you said about how terrorist organizations basically they use the tools that are already there. If there's already a civil war, they use that. If there is already a problem, they will use that. But don't you think that's more like feeding feeding these militias the problems that will enable them to take over societies?
You see, the media today, it's available for everybody. For me, for you, for the family, for kids, you cannot prevent them. Even if you try to prevent them from reaching, they have the tools and means to go around.
Okay.
As I said, they are very committed. They have engineers in IT. They have doctors. They know how to communicate. So it's very difficult because it's not only those from Afghanistan or subcontinent or from these illiterate people. They are intellectual. They know what they're doing. And they are committed. And this is a problem the world is facing.
Yes, yes. Finally, before we go to our next part, I wanted to ask you, when we look at the interpretation of countries about Islam and about terrorism, not Islam, when they interpret Islam, they see a bearded man or a woman with niqab. In what regard did the stereotypical image of bearded men or women become that of a terrorist militia?
Well, if you speak about the Western countries, I think this is not a correct interpretation of this kind of phenomenon. Why? I'll tell you why. In the 50s and 60s, take the subcontinents like India, Pakistan, also Afghanistan. You see how they dress. They have full niqab, okay? Almost all the Muslims in the subcontinent, they have big beards, they have short sarwal, whatever you call it. And it has been there in the 50s and 60s, and we have never heard of Daesh or terrorism.
How can Islamic countries change that image?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. it's not the way you dress or the way you put your makeup or the way you put your, it is in the mind of the people.
Yes.
It is in their mind. How can we change this? Through education, through dialogue, through physical contact. Once I listened BBC English,
Yes.
a program, what the kingdoms of Saudi Arabia are doing, and I appreciate that very much. Those who come back from Afghanistan after, you know, Russia, the Soviet Union left Afghanistan, there are so many tourists coming. They have a center in Riyadh, very sophisticated. They have teachers, they have clerics. How they can bring these people into society? They create job for them. They have dialogue. They speak the same language from the Holy Quran. They don't use force with them. They use conventions, and this is very important. Saudi Arabia has taken the lead in this, and we should follow this lead. It's very important.
Yes.
We should not, we should, when these people come back, we should not threaten them. We should not use force with them.
Reintegrate.
Absolutely. After all, these are human beings. These people at Riyadh Center, they're giving job, they married, they're happy, they have children, and they can be again, a normal part and factor in the society and change.
Yes.
That's the kind of policies we should have.
True. Well, let's talk about that a little bit later on. For further discussions, we're going to turn to Mr. Grant Huxham, the Senior Advisor to Gulf State Analytics, joining us from the United Arab Emirates. Hello, Mr. Grant.
Good afternoon. How are you all?
I'm great. We're discussing the issue of terrorism as an international phenomenon. Asking you, or my question directed to you, is that during 2015 and 2016, we have witnessed an increase in the number of terrorist operations in our region and in the world as well. What led to this increase?
You know, the root causes are many and complex as relates to terrorism itself. And I was listening to the former speaker, and I cannot endorse more strongly what he was saying. I'm primarily an expert in economics, and what we understand from economics and how it impacts terrorism is that when an individual, and I'm talking here primarily about the young, when they are raised in an environment where they feel powerless, then they are forced through Maslow's hierarchy of needs to take action. And what we've seen in the region in 2015 and 2016 has been a significant economic impoverishment across the region, where ordinary families and middle-class families are facing more and more pressure on them economically. And then the young within those homes, they feel that pressure, and they feel that as a powerlessness or indeed as an oppression. And so what we understand from economics is that when individuals, irrespective of where they are on the globe, feel that they are powerless or that they are oppressed, they then automatically look towards replacing that feeling with one of power and one of action. And terrorism is very attractive because it provides an individual with a feeling of a moral right in terms of correcting a wrong, as well as being actually involved individually in taking action. If the individual feels disconnected from the community, and if the individual feels that they have no role to play in that community, and then you put on top of that, the individual feels they cannot change that community, then these individuals are highly susceptible to the lure of taking action. And action can take the form of terrorism.
Yes. Now, there are some manifestations or religious manifestations that show a person that they're part of a certain religion, such as the beard and the niqab. How did that turn to a stereotype of terrorism?
It's very unfortunate because, unfortunately, media likes sound bites and images. Now, images speak 1,000 words. And unfortunately, sloppy journalism in the West tends to accompany articles on terrorism with pictures of people who the West identify as being religiously motivated, the devout. So there develops over time a subconscious identification of terrorism when one sees an image such as the niqab or the beard. The reality, as we know in the region, is a beard is common to men throughout many cultures, not just Islam. And there are many millions of women in Islam who peacefully wear the niqab. We have to counter this by asking the journalist or the media themselves to start to responsibly attach the right images to articles on terrorism, and not just casually attach an image where they try to convey that terrorism comes from the devout community, which we, as we know, is not simply true.
Yes. Mr. Haksem, we've also seen an increase in the number of foreign fighters that are fighting, that have traveled to join terrorist groups. Is the reason behind that also maybe economic weakness that they might have, or certain problems that they might face themselves where they would go to such terrorist groups for power and for money?
Well, I do think economics is very much the root cause of creating the feeling of powerlessness. But in terms of the number of foreign fighters, what I think has been instrumental in the increase is social media and journalist networks. Because what we find with media and networks is that they stimulate outrage against immoral or unjust actions in the eyes of the perceiver. And we don't see this just alone in this region. I'll give you a very good example. The American public was exposed to a daily diet of television news during the Vietnam War, which was the first war that was actually covered by media uncensored. And the public over time turned against its own government and against its own armed forces because they were using sound bites to interpret what the moral action was that they were seeing in front of them. I think the youth in the region, and we know that the Arab youth is very much connected to social media and social networks. The youth is being exposed to images and ideas and indeed opinion, but not necessarily seeing a counter to that opinion. And then they form their own view. And unfortunately, what happens is a young person, particularly, when they feel that they need to take action in order to recover some feeling of power, then that's why we see foreign fighters traveling to join terrorist groups in order to, to become powerful again, to actually feel that they have some meaning in this world.
Well, listening to all of that, I'd like to hear your opinion on how do you evaluate the regional and the international efforts that deal with the issues of extremist ideologies that we see in the media or in other outlets?
Look, it's very dangerous for us. And I'll give you another analogy. Mao Zedong, when he was asked how did he perceive the impact of the French Revolution, he said, too early to tell. I think the measure for us as a culture or as a region and the cultures within the region is going to be what we see in the next 5 to 10 years. And the reason I say that is it's too early for us to tell how the 12-year-old child or the 14-year-old child who has been influenced by images coming out of places such as Iraq in the 2000s and now Syria in the teenage years of the century, how will they react when they become young adults in the future to issues that they perceive as being unjust or immoral? And this is a worldwide issue because we now have the young who are understanding what the privileges are of becoming a young teenager or young adult through social media and the selfie and all this exposure and commentary from their peer groups. But what I don't understand yet is how well we are countering the arguments of the radicalist by identifying for the young what are the responsibilities that come along with being an adult in the modern world.
Yes, great. Thank you very much, Mr. Haksem, for your insight and for joining us. And that was Mr. Grant Haksem, the Senior Advisor to Gulf State Analytics. Mr. Haddad, give us your opinion on what Mr. Haksem said.
Well, of course, he spoke about so many things about international terrorism, the expose of young, the spread of international in Europe, and the Middle East, and the reason behind it, and what is the cure, and what is the prevention, how we could prevent such kind of acts from taking place, not only in Arab and Western, the whole world. Well, I think there are certain factors for prevention of such kind of things. One important factor is the United Nations.
Yeah.
The United Nations has very important role to play here. July 1st of this year, 2016, they have what is called counterterrorism strategy, in which they cited the policy, the way forward, how can a country or countries can tackle such dangerous phenomenon in the world.
Yes.
What they said is this. They said, well, let's study the reasons, the conductive reason for such kind of phenomena. Why this phenomenon is there here now, before it wasn't there.
Yes.
So let us study the reason. And this is very important things. They mentioned economic reason, as our friends have said, unemployment, as I said before also. This is very important. Then they said, okay, let's see how we can have dialogue with these people. How can we open up with these people? As I said before, we should not keep them aloof. We should bring them in the society, the same dialogue, peacefully, without using force, convention. This is the second pillar of that.
Actually, let's look at the next report. You'll see there's a little bit talking about that part exactly.
Sure, please.
Intercontinental terrorism is an act that should not be justified beneath religious doctrines or acknowledged to the modern society. States that emphatically aid peace reject the use of religious rules as grounds for violence and terrorism. The majority of the renewed religions inside the earth preach the very same doctrine. All of them call up for mutual being familiar with, independence of expression and perception, peace, adore, coupled with tolerance. Because of this, faith must not justify any acts of international terrorism, combined with its results within the culture.
I know something about radicalization, terrorism in my part of the world, and what we see is that the Muslims who radicalize, they know very little about Islam, the Quran, you name it. It's completely different. This is what we saw in the 1970s in Germany, in the Netherlands, my country, where you always have radicalized people who want to change the world, and this is what's going on, and we have to deal with it, and that means that we should find a solution not to radicalize the whole society, but to diffuse it.
Record numbers of people have died in terrorist attacks over the past couple of years, with the highest numbers yet being achieved last year. If we look back in time, only 3,000 terrorism-related deaths occurred back in 2000, but over the course of less than a decade and a half, the number had risen to over 32,000 deaths in 2014, an almost tenfold increase. Worse still is that the numbers are likely to reach even greater tallies as we move further in analyzing last year's data. Of the 28,000 people killed in terrorist attacks in 2015, 24% of them were perpetrators of terrorist attacks which were killed intentionally in suicide attacks, accidentally while attempting to carry out attacks, or by security forces or victims responding to these attacks. This is an 11% increase in the number of perpetrators' deaths compared to 2014, as the number of terrorist kidnapping and hostage-taking increased in 2015 to more than 12,000. Although terrorist attacks took place in 92 countries, they were heavily concentrated geographically. More than 55% of all attacks took place in 5 countries, which are Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, and Nigeria, and 74% of all deaths due to terrorist attacks took place in Iraq, Afghanistan, Nigeria, Syria, and Pakistan. The question now, as extremism and terrorism ideologies are spreading, what can countries do to eliminate the dangers of such a phenomena? And is it possible to actually abolish such ideas?
This is one of the most difficult questions that we have to answer now. Terrorism hasn't only affected our region, but it has also spread to Europe, as we saw in the video. How can we eliminate terrorism?
Well, as I said, it's not one country responsibility. It's not group of countries responsibility. It is the whole as the world as a whole. And here I mentioned the United Nations. The United Nations, as I said, have the strategy of counterterrorism. They have the means, they have the experts, they know the rules. They dealt with 195 countries which are members of the General Assembly can have a great role in this. Since 1991 and until now, there are so many resolutions passed by the United Nations General Assembly regarding counterterrorism. And they are telling the state how they can deal with these acts when it happens. And before it happens, the Security Council also issues so many resolutions. So the UN can play a very important role in this field, in preventing the terrorism from taking place. Not only that, we have also international organizations who can play a role, like World Civilization Organization, Civil Aviation organizations, like WTO, like the ITU. All these entities can have a certain part in preventing this phenomenon from spreading in a certain country or to another countries in the world. So the UN has and here also I can tell you there are also two entities who can play important roles. The Human Rights Councils of the United Nations. This council can, through the respect for a human right, can also contribute to prevention of such kind of terrorism taking place in the world. You have also the human rights commissioners in Geneva. These people also very much, they have the expertise, they have the experts people, they know what is going on. They can also advise countries who have problems with human rights, who can avoid such kind of terrorist acts. So it is a world effort. It's not one state or a group of states.
I understand that, but Joe, your opinion on the fact that the world effort has become more clear after the first attacks in France?
Well, this kind of action or acts being going for a long time. It's not only in France. But why in France? There are reasons behind it. If you see in France, there are about 5 million or more from Algeria and Morocco, North Africa. And these people, they are very much integrated into the French society. And this kind of Daesh or Taliban, or they're exploiting certain elements. I'm not saying all of them. Some of them very much committed to the state, to the French systems, to the French values, but there are exceptions. As our friends in the report said, those who are exposed, like unemployed, like young people who don't understand Islam, exactly what is Islam. They can very easily afraid on them, they can very easily bring them into their system, convince them, and have a lot of attacks, in Europe, and like in France, in Nice, so many people were killed, like in Belgium also, so many people were. So it is unfortunately.
It is unfortunate that they do dwell on these people. What are the steps that the countries of this region need to do to overcome, or at least reduce the impact, to reduce the impact and spread of these evil ideologies?
Well, GCC countries, they have very clear policy plans vis-a-vis this problem. They are coordinating their action via the Ministries of Interiors, through their media, through the conferences when they have between now and then, through when they meet, through the clerics, mosque. It is fortunate in the Gulf that we have a moderate Islam. We don't have extremism, like take Bahrain. It's a very tolerant society. We have Jews, we have Muslims, we have Christians, we have Hindus, and it should be that way. Well, I should respect the man as a human being. Why should I care about what he believes? It's been between him and his God. And if we coordinate our policies in the Gulf, exchange information, and also benefits from United Nations and its entities, then we can be safe. And we are safe because economically, we are sound. Of course, there are certain problems now within the economy, but all in all,
not drastic.
Exactly. That's why. And the most important thing is how much the GCC are committed to fight this phenomenon.
Yes.
And as I mentioned, the Saudi example, we should follow suit.
Yes.
And it's very important.
Yes. Mr. Haddad, before we end this, is there anything that you would like to add to this particular subject?
Well, I hope peace will prevail in the world. I hope this phenomena will come to an end one day. And I am very much optimistic that this day will come and not very far.
Inshallah. Thank you very much, Mr. Ahmed
Thank you.
Al-Haddad.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you.
And we would like to thank you for watching and see you next week in another episode of Inside Edition.